All right, we're going to be doing a breakdown regarding this inquiry or this interview between 9/11 Commission panelist Fred Fielding, and he interviews Jane Garvey, the administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration.
Commissioner Fielding.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. Thank you both very much for coming to help us today. Our task is really fourfold when we're dealing with aviation security, because we're trying to figure out, first of all, what was the state of the system on 9/11? Secondly, what happened specifically on 9/11, which of course could be different from what the particular state of the system may have been. What's the state of the system today? And what are our recommendations to assist in doing everything we can to assure that this sort of thing doesn't happen again? My first line of questioning, I would like to concentrate and focus on 9/11 itself. When we've reviewed, and from what we know up till now, these hijackers beat the system. Whatever it was, they beat it. We know that they practiced. We know that they took trial runs. We know that they must have figured out where the weaknesses were, consistent with their plans. Because after all,
Which isn't hard, really, when you think about it, because even though the planning stages were allegedly went unnoticed, and they weren't, actually the intelligence services knew what they were doing, and they were protected by the CIA and the NSA, and also they were being followed by Saudi and Israeli intelligence inside the country. The hard part is not hijacking the plane. It's allowing the planes to intervene in airspace without proper defense intervening. That's when you have to have foreknowledge about the event. That would come if the intelligence agencies are in on it and inform specific high-level administrators in the Pentagon. That's a plausible scenario. I'm not insisting that that was the case, but that's not a fringe conspiracy. A fringe conspiracy would be the hijackers of the planes didn't exist, right? This would be a plausible scenario.
they had to be 100% sure they all got on the planes that day. So they had to test that system. And they gamed it, and they beat it. Painfully so, they beat it. So what I'd really like to figure out is, and what we all want to figure out, is how that happened, and specifically what happened in the case of these hijackers. So I guess my first question, and it's probably addressed to you, Ms. Garvey, is what inquiries and investigations were initiated after 9/11 that would have reflected and identified the causes and actually the actions that took place on 9/11 vis-a-vis the hijackers?
Well, Commissioner, in some cases, we really had the protocols already in place. In other words, we had security people at all of those airports. And so there was an immediate communication from Washington to those airports and a sort of direct line of communication collecting information. But I would say also that almost immediately the FBI obviously was involved. So the FBI became the sort of lead agency, if you will, with us gathering information for them at those airports and funneling that directly to them. I will tell you quite honestly, I do not know all of the pieces of the of what the FBI has uncovered. I was briefed in October. The line of questioning I had for the FBI at that time is, what actions, based on what you know, I obviously do not need to know everything that you do, but based on what you know, are there changes we should be making to the system? So when you look back and see all the security directives that came out very quickly after 9/11, the new directions to the airlines, those were based on communications with the FBI and the intelligence community. What changes should we make based on what you know?
That's interesting, because I just did a breakdown video regarding FAA FAA operations managers, Monty Belger and Ben Sliney, where it was reported that during the commission trials, they didn't admit that there was a number of reports that were coming in from federal agencies regarding bin Laden and the wish to hijack planes throughout the year 2001. In fact, I provided some information about 56 detailed reports in 2001, the spring and summer of 2001, where they were warning the FAA about bin Laden and Al-Qaeda operatives wanting to hijack planes and crash them. And the FAA, through no fault of their own, or maybe through fault of their own, didn't implement stricter security measures. And that would fall on not just Jane Garvey, the former administrator, but on Monty Belger, the acting administrator, or Ben Sliney, the operations manager. But Ben Sliney, at least, he gave the national stand-down order. It wasn't Norman Mineta. It was Ben Sliney, gave the initial. Saved probably more lives that way because there was extra hijackings. But I'm going to answer Garvey's inquiry about, or her thoughts about what the FBI knew in a couple of minutes, because I'm going to play another video which shows that the FBI knew the hijackers by name on September 11, 2001. Now that would contradict what Attorney General Richard Ashcroft and the FBI Director Robert Mueller said regarding the flight manifests, which they didn't make public until that, I think it was September 13th, but they didn't match the names and photographs for the first time to the public until September 27th. But these guys knew just hours after the hijackings. I'll play that video. It's from Susan and Joe Trento, in which they wrote a book, Unsafe at Any Altitude, which was truly one of the most underrated works regarding the real anomalies surrounding the extra hijackings and the lacks of security at Logan, at Dulles, and the Oregon Bright Security, who was in charge of security screening at Logan and Dulles, and had a poor screening process when it came to employees. And they went into it a little bit in the book.
Okay, well, thank you.
Hope that
See,
helps.
what we're trying to look for is we're trying to identify answers and also sources of information so that we can divine the answers.
Right.
So I guess what I'm also asking you, or both of you, I mean, if you feel that there's an insufficiency in an answer, you can add something to it, please do, Mr. Mead. But what reports were prepared by the FAA that we should be looking at?
There are a number of reports that were prepared both by our security teams, those folks who were actually in the field. There were reports that were coming up literally first few days, literally hourly, but then certainly daily reports that we were getting directly to the secretary. So the reports were coming very quickly. They were coming orally, and they were coming in a written fashion. But the point of contact, the initial point of contact, were those field inspectors, those agents, those people literally in the field, literally at the airport. They were gathering information, communicating it both to us and then also to the FBI that was pulled in at the local level as well. Another source of information, of course, would be the air traffic control side of the house. The radar information, the tracking information, the air traffic control tapes, all of those were readily made available to the FBI. All of those, very, very, very clearly, in some cases, lay out a sequence of events.
I have a couple of questions about those. I'd like to come to that, but
Yeah, by the way, those ATC audio reports and the audio from air traffic control at Indianapolis and New York are available on archive.org.
speaking of that day, and in particular, if you know, and if you were briefed on this, you know, the regulations speak of dangerous weapons. There's a definitional issue of what's dangerous weapons. But was there any evidence of, for instance, in weapons, of guns being transported onto those planes?
There, to my knowledge, well, I'm going to be more definitive than that. There was not. I actually, we were briefed on that. There was a lot of confusion, as some have called it, the fog of war. There was a report.
Fog of war. You know, how do you mistake anything with a gun? All right, let's just say it was knives. How do you mistake a gun with a knife? And where did that initial report come from? Guess what? I'm going to show you in a minute.
That at one point surfaced, and it may have been even part of a written report that had surfaced from somewhere in the field. It may have been from American Airlines in particular, that spoke about a gun. The FBI, to my knowledge, and again, I don't know if this has changed since I've left, but certainly when I was there, the FBI looked at that. GAO, I believe, also did a report on that as well and found no evidence of that it may have been something that was reported in the confusion. And frankly, that's a challenge for people even going through the information to make sure that we're sorting out what really happened from what may have been some extraordinarily difficult moments, obviously.
Okay, now I'm going to show you the initial draft report made by an unnamed employee of American Airlines, in which it talked about a gunshot on American Airlines 11, and that what killed Daniel Lewin. Daniel Lewin, who is the infamous Sayeret Mascaral terrorist counter-terrorist officer, who is, according to the official definition, he was stabbed by Satam al-Saskami, seated in 9B. However, as you could see in this executive summary dated September 11, this is what Jane Garvey was talking about. This report here. And I'll read you the following. The American Airlines FAA Principal Security Inspector was notified by Suzanne Clark of American Airlines corporate headquarters that an onboard flight attendant contacted, American Airlines Operations Centers and informed that a passenger located in seat 10B shot and killed a passenger in seat 9B at 9:20 a.m. The passenger killed was Daniel Lewin, shot by passenger Satam al-Saskami. One bullet was reported to have been fired. The flight headed in the direction of JFK Airport. Now, this is a definitive report. This is not coming from a third-hand source. This is coming by the American Airlines Principal Safety Inspector, who was notified by Suzanne Clark of American Airlines corporate headquarters, and that she got that report from an onboard flight attendant. Now, I'm going to assume this was Betty Ong. Now, the whole audio of Betty Ong wasn't 9 minutes. Now, that's what's public. There's an extra 20 that isn't public. I wonder whether this incident is the reason why. And I'm going to lead you into something which would make sense to this in just a minute, because I'm going to show you another video. And this video is from the Unsafe at Any Altitude. It's a short video, and I'm not going to play the whole thing. I'm going to play a couple, just like a minute or two, regarding how a weapon could have very well ended up like a gun on American Airlines 11. Here is Eric Gill, in which Susan and Joe Trento went and interviewed. Eric Gill was a security officer working for Argenbright, who was working the night shift on September 10th, 2001. Let's take a listen.
On the evening of September 10th, 2001, at Dulles International Airport, the rush was over. Argonne-Bright security employee Eric Gill had just returned to supervising the West checkpoint. He saw something strange. Gill, a Pakistani man who fled to the U.S. to escape religious persecution, did not want his face shown.
I saw about 5 Middle Eastern people. They were walking through the side door we have at West Checkpoint, which is accessed by only few restricted people. I noticed that 3 of them were wearing a uniform and IDs. 2 other guys who were not wearing a uniform and had no IDs, and they were trying to escort these 2 guys through there. As soon as they walked inside the checkpoint, they just stopped there and started watching around. That made me suspicious.
Gill's suspicions were well placed. The men, dressed in United Airlines ground workers' uniforms, wanted access to a door that led to the concourse and parked planes. The men tried to use one electronic badge to swipe through. Gill stopped them.
They didn't like it, and he abused me, and he said, "F off. We are people you don't know. You should be allowed to go through here, but you make your own rules." And he just walked out with it.
Eric Gill and other witnesses took no further action, but the Middle Eastern men were not through. Gill would later identify 2 of the men as the Al-Qaeda hijackers of a plane from Boston, as well as American Airlines Flight 77 out of Dulles. The Flight 77 hijackers prepared for their destiny at the Marriott Residence Inn, a quick drive from Dulles. Coincidentally, that same night, the Saudi royal family's leading funder for Islamic causes was occupying a room in that very hotel.
Now, of course, now look, what I'm insinuating here isn't, again, fringe conspiracy. It makes some sense that these guys very well could have tried to plant weapons on these planes. And basically, that's how a gun could have been on board Flight 11. Operatives maybe at Logan Airport, or even employees of Argonne-Bright, or employees of Logan. The plane is being prepped on the tarmac the night before. Now with 77, it very well could have been a gun or a knife, because there is a report of a gun on 77. In fact, there were 6 hijackers on 77, it's reported. And that's coming from a flight attendant who made a call, Renee May. Don't you think this should have been investigated thoroughly? But no, because if you don't believe in hijackers, you don't believe that phone calls are legitimate, there is no anomaly here. Wake up, truth movement.
Obviously.
Mr. Meade, do you have any information that differs from that?
No, sir.
Okay, well, thank you. Also, how about any evidence of bombs on board any of the 3 planes?
No evidence that, certainly that I'm aware of.
Okay, but, I mean, going back to my prior...
Even though there was a bomb reported on Flight 93, and it was fake anyway. So Jane Garvey is basically saying, oh, I'm not familiar with any bombs on planes. You had a number of calls on Flight 93 suggesting there was a bomb on board.
question, the reason I had raised the thing about the guns was that there was an earlier FAA report, or reported report, coming out of American, I think it was 11.
Yes.
Okay. How about box cutters?
How do you not know that in the 9/11? First of all, commission here, and you're suggesting, oh, there was no reports of a bomb on board. Why would she deny that? Does she, and is she not made aware of that? I would be shocked that she wasn't.
Have any box cutters been recovered?
I do not know, and I would assume that that obviously would be the FBI. I'll tell you again how we approached it in going to the FBI and saying, we are, obviously going to make some changes here. Do we need to, what do we need to consider? Were box cutters involved, and I want to be careful about this because I do recognize the sensitivity. We were certainly, if encouraged is too strong a word, I don't mean it to be too strong, but it was suggested that prohibiting box cutters would be a good thing. To the extent to which they were used or how they were used, I don't have that information.
Mr. Mead?
How do you not know that there weren't box cutters involved? I mean, we have Muhammad Atta visiting Walmart just a couple of nights prior, actually the night prior to 9/11, purchasing box cutters. He's even on camera, and he even paid it out of his credit card. We do have a number of reports that said they saw knives instead of box cutters. That there were knives. There were knives found in the debris field at Shanksville.
Need anything?
No, sir.
The box cutter issue is kind of an interesting one to us and a little perplexing to us because, candidly, as I read the regulations, a box cutter that
This is a security issue. This is not an issue regarding, say, I don't know, about vague reports of hijackings, right? Those reports were vague, right? But the detailed reports about security lapses, now this is years and years old, and the FAA basically turned a blind eye, whether it's bureaucracy, whether it's poor wealth management, or just a lack of funding, where they didn't take the security measures, which, they should have made them stricter or improved on them, and they didn't. And this was a big deal in the Argenbright case. In fact, the owner, Frank Argenbright, was the only person that I know of to this very day that took that bared any responsibility, was fired from his management, and he wasn't even made to defend himself. And I don't think it's even his fault, to tell you the truth. I think it's the CEOs under him who basically told him, don't say anything to the media, don't go and defend yourself. Meanwhile, you had representatives from Argenbright basically saying on their behalf that it wasn't their fault that there were security lapses. Somebody had to take the fall, and so guess what? Frank did. But yeah, Frank Argenbright's security basically was the reason why we have the TSA now, which didn't make any improvements whatsoever in terms of security. Didn't make any fight. What the federal government did was, we took your job away. That's what the federal government did, and instituted their own security apparatus.
that's 4 inches was a prohibited item, a box cutter that was under 4 inches was not. Is that your understanding as well?
That is correct, Commissioner.
So theoretically, if somebody went up with 23-inch box cutters, they could get on the plane, theoretically.
Theoretically, yes. 20 individual ones. Is
Yes,
that what you're saying?
yes. I don't mean
Oh, I
somebody
was, sorry.
A knife bigger than four, just
Okay,
put 4 fingers, right? If the knife is bigger than the 4 fingers, you're not allowed in, right? So that's the same with a box cutter. I think it's just absurd. Why would you need a box cutter on the plane? You're not doing any carpentry on the plane, so I don't know why they even allowed that much. So this is what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the protocols and regulations of the airline industry, which were completely lacking. And the reports were out there. Hey, Bin Laden, Al Qaeda, they're interested in hijacking planes. Do I need to repeat myself? Pachinko plot? The FBI never shared that information. If they did, they may have had stricter security measures at the FAA and Immigration Naturalization Services, the INS. Who knows?
Was there any evidence that you're aware of pre-positioning of weapons on aircraft?
I simply do not know.
Now, that's not true, because there were reports on CNN, and my co-researcher, Nelson Martins, DJ Thermal Detonator, myself and him, and even Ryan Dawson, over the years, we have told people that there were weapons found on planes. CNN has reported this. I'm not even making this up. Look, additional weapons found on extra planes. CNN report, right? So there were reports of box cutters taped to the back of food trays days after 9/11. There was a report of a woman who had would look like a bomb underneath her seat. No, DJ Templeton is the best in the world that I know of that reports on the additional hijackings and operators. And I think there was over like, was it 25 or 50 people that were arrested at JFK when they lifted the suspensions of the airlines. So yeah, that was the second wave that Zacharias Moussaoui was talking about on his own behalf, and he wasn't tortured. Now, who are these guys? Well, it doesn't necessarily mean they were Al Qaeda. Well, if they weren't Al Qaeda, who were those guys? That would go against the official narrative. And this is the anomalies I'm talking about. But nobody cares.
About strategic pre-boarding selection of seats.
I don't know. I think that's all part of the FBI.
And that comes from the Al Qaeda or Arab terrorist operators who were inside the United States scouting the security lapses on planes. Now, there's an incident involving two Saudi nationals in the year 2000, Mohammed al-Qurtareen and al-Hawali, in which they went on I believe it was a Delta flight, and where they tried to get into the cockpit, and then when the stewardess basically went up to them and said, what are you doing? He goes, oh, I went to go to the bathroom. And they did that again, twice. And so they found them to be suspicious, reported them to the FBI, in which they alerted the Saudi embassy because they were going to a Saudi embassy dinner in Washington, D.C., these two guys. Lo and behold, a couple of years later, finds out that one of them was training at a Al-Qaeda base in Al Farouk training camp, where a couple of the 9/11 hijackers went. So a number of news agencies reported, including the FBI Government Accountability Office, where they reported that, and an Inspector General report, where they said that this was a dry run to test security on these planes.
FBI investigation.
But none of that's been brought to your attention.
No, it has not, Commissioner.
Mr. Mead? Okay, thank you. Let's go to the investigations, though. After the incident, did the FAA conduct any interviews of people that had access to the aircraft? By that I mean the sweepers, the cleaners, anybody, where they interviewed?
We became very quickly the sort of supporting role for the FBI, really the investigation, and those individual interviews would have been conducted by the FBI. I would certainly want to check, but I would certainly imagine that in some cases, some of the FAA personnel may have been present, may even have been responsible for facilitating the meeting or whatever. But the lead focus or the lead agency very quickly became the FBI.
Well, let's talk about that, because the FBI basically did interview a number of people involving with security, Argabright security. Nicholas Da Silva, who was working alongside Eric Gill, who I just played the video on, he was actually deported back to his home country. The FBI didn't care what he had to say, even though he saw the same people that Eric Gill saw. So what they did to him, he was deported back to his home country. I forgot the name of the country he was involved with. And I'm not really trusting of the FBI. Now, I'm not saying that the entire agency is involved, but after 9/11, not before, we have a number of whistleblowers blowing the whistle, talking about reports, talking about Al Qaeda operatives living inside the United States, training at flight schools. Ken Williams, Harry Samad, Mark Rossini at Alex Station, Doug Miller, Frank Pellegrino, Jack Clunan, Ali Soufan, these guys are great. But afterwards, I'm not so sure. Now, I'm going to play you a video, same video coming from Susan and Joe B. Trento, regarding the FBI going to Dulles and looking at security cameras and naming the hijackers by name when they first see them, entering security, the security screening area. How would they know that? Well, let's see.
Within 2 hours, the FBI, immigration, and all other authorities locked down the airport. Security screeners were taken to the baggage area to be interviewed. Argenbright supervisor Ed Nelson watched employee after employee disappear.
We would get phone calls and saying, hey, send this person down, now send this person down. And what started occurring was they weren't coming back. They weren't coming back from the customs area where they were doing the interviews. Hours and hours went by, and I would call and nobody would call, and I would finally get a call back saying, don't expect this one to come back. Don't expect this guy to come back. He's gone. And they would just take him from the airport down to D.C. and lock him up.
In the process, the authorities threw out some key witnesses.
Probably the most incredibly poor decision made by the authorities was that the key security guard at Dulles Airport, who was the last man between the airplanes and the hijackers, was never questioned about what he saw on the night of September 10th.
Eyewitnesses were the only remaining
That's Nicholas De Silva, the guy I told you about.
source. 58 of the hard drives for the electric badges were confiscated by the FBI, along with the security camera video.
Look at
Did
that.
you ever sneak a look at that videotape to see if it was the same people?
No, it never happened with me. I don't know why.
Ed Nelson saw the tape just hours after the attack.
Because right when they showed me the tape, they rolled it, stop. Now there's one. Roll it, stop. There's the second one. I mean, they knew right away, and there was many of people coming through that checkpoint at the same time.
But Ed, how would they know? The FBI claimed they had no idea who these hijackers were.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, it boggles my mind.
Well, there you go. I mean, bam. That's the reason why you won't hear Jane Garvey talk about, oh, why? Why did they, whether they interviewed anybody at Dulles or Logan or even Newark, right? Jane Garvey's going to look like a deer in the headlights. I don't know if they did. They obviously did, and she knows it. And why isn't she being forthright?
Were there any FAA reports on this that you're aware of?
There may have been some summary reports. I'd certainly want to go back and check.
There may have been.
Another thing that's always interested me was, have they ever gone back and checked the videos of taping of the screening process when people were going through the
I
mean
do
the
know
tapes
that
that I just
those were turned over to the FBI. I do know that they were carefully reviewed.
from both airports?
I believe it was for both, but I know for at least one of them.
Well, she's Logan and Dulles anyway, because allegedly Newark doesn't.
You know, when you go through an aircraft, I mean, boarding an airliner, and you go through and occasionally somebody asks you to step to one side, take off your shoes, take off your belt, whatever it is, and then they screen you. And I guess 99.9% of those people then ultimately get passed on and get passed through. But in an incident where somebody would be pulled aside, there would be some question, some serious question as to whether they could get on the aircraft. Where are those, are records kept of those incidents?
There are records, Commissioner, yes.
And have those records been reviewed in regard to the identities of people that were, well, the hijackers,
I
basically?
know that they have all been turned over to the FBI, yes, yes.
Well, you know what? How come those aren't public? I tell you, it's amazing because, the 9/11 Truth Movement basically prides itself on being a movement that's trying to be progressive and get to the heart of the matter so that they can have another inquiry or another committee investigate 9/11. Well, here you go. If you are just going to sit there and say 9/11 Commission is all false and wrong, well, how do you know if you never read it? Because most of you never read it. You never even bothered to open up a book or look at primary source material, right? Well, here you have just one video, and I've done a couple now, breakdown videos for you, because I want to force the issue now. I want to like show you the issue because nobody else is doing it. And there's very few of us that, try to elucidate the actual anomalies, opposite of the freaking fringe conspiracies of no planes and no hijackers that are purported by the likes of Christopher Bolin and Rebecca Roth and Jason Burmis and CIT and all. I can name you 50 more. But yeah, look at these anomalies, right? This shows a much bigger conspiracy involving the security apparatuses, the intelligence agencies, the federal government. And it's not everybody. It's the bureaucrats. It's the high-level people. But you wouldn't know it if you don't investigate it. Because if there's no planes and no hijackers, there's nothing to investigate. You could just insinuate your preconceived beliefs based on someone else's imagination. They're not even yours. So I'm hoping to, open up some people's critical thinking skills to show you real anomalies where you can show in the future in a court of law and say, hey, look, you weren't very truthful regarding this. Where did that report come from with Daniel Lewin getting shot? Well, that came from the flight attendant on the plane who was reporting that to Susan Clark, who was reporting that to the security director. Jane Garvey will have you think, oh, no, it was an initial report in the wind. Regarding the FBI viewing videotapes. Yeah, they did. They have them. Why aren't those public? What do they don't want to show you? Do they don't want to show you how these guys basically beat the security apparatuses of these airlines, which basically probably hired Al-Qaeda operatives without them knowing it? Showing a number of different planes being hijacked by maybe even operators outside of Al-Qaeda? And who were they? It's not the story that they told in the 9/11 Commission. It's a story that's being hidden from us. But we do have some pieces. And if we put them together, we could paint a picture that's opposite of what the federal government has constructed for us. But we got to use our heads.